All right, everyone, welcome to our event with Andy Nelson. I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about work on climate, and then we'll jump right into the presentation. So we're part of a large volunteer team of the Work on Climate organization. Our mission is to support people to transition to climate jobs or make their current job a climate job. Work on Climate does that by connecting people through a global Slack community. Not sure how many people use Slack, but that's where we are, with over 20,000 members offering free climate expert hours and producing a series of events focused on the climate workforce, just like the one that you're in today. So if you're interested in joining us, please visit our website for more details. I will put some info in the chat right now. And then, give me 1 second. You can also scan the QR codes that you see on your screen. And Andy requested that I skip his intro because he's going to introduce himself. So here's Andy.
All right. Not just because I'm going to introduce myself, but mainly because no one really listens anyway. Okay. So before we get started, I think if I want you to think of two things and take them out from this conversation, it is firstly that what we do in the next 90 minutes isn't what's going to change your outcomes, it's what you do afterwards. So yes, we're going to cover a lot of ground, but most of the work is either going to come from exercises and resources that I'm going to share afterwards, or because you're going to do something differently because of what you've learned. And the second thing that I want you to remember is, and this can be difficult to hear, that your opinion of what you do really doesn't matter because no one cares. We have to focus, if you're trying to find a job, on what the market wants and not what we want. Even if it's the thing that we are most proud of, we need to be able to find a way to translate that into a problem that somebody wants solved. Okay. So with that in mind, and the whole no one cares about, your point of view, and constantly make the mistake of telling people our own story from our own point of view, I am deeply aware of the irony that what I'm about to do next is to give you the 90-second version of my own credible backstory, because credibility is part of what we need to learn, and we're going to cover that in today's session as well. So I guess to answer that question of why you're here and why do you want to listen to me is that I've been through this from both sides. I did business school, management consulting for firms like Unilever and Google and Coca-Cola and, awkwardly, Shell before. And then I led an analytics startup through to exit and advised climate tech companies on the go-to-market strategy. And across this, I've employed hundreds of talented people. But in the last few years, I've also helped hundreds more find their niche and make their impact. And I have watched in dismay as many of them have wasted hours looking in the wrong place, spending time on things that don't matter, and spinning in circles whilst feeling totally overwhelmed. It's the endless job board scrolling, it's the spray and play applications, it's the late nights with 30 browser tabs open and no forward progress. And on the other side, I've taken several career breaks myself. I've paused to be a full-time father, I've paused to travel, I've stopped because bluntly to overcome horrific burnout, but each time I've come back into a stronger position than I left because I've focused my efforts on the areas that are most likely to give results. And that's kind of what I want to share with you today. Because after my own climate epiphany, I realized that this is the biggest lever that I can pull, and it is why I do what I do. It's helping smart, capable professionals like you find your niche and make a planet positive impact. So here it is. It is a sprint through almost everything that you need to get to go from overwhelmed to confident, to nail down your doubts and overcome that concern, and to be genuinely making meaningful steps towards your climate career. Which sounds very promising, it sounds very encouraging. We have only got 90 minutes, so this is going to be fast. We have a lot to cover. It is broadly split into two parts. There is the exploring phase and there is the applying phase. But to be absolutely clear, that from the outset, this workshop will also feature absolutely no resume help, because change will not come from changing your CV. It will come from changing your calendar. And bluntly, I assume you are all smart, capable, intelligent people that can find the 9 hot tips to make your CV stand out, because you all know how to use Google or ChatGPT. And if I'm wrong about that, then I'm sorry. We're probably not going to find you a career anyway. Okay, so why am I so dismissive about this typical job board scrolling, cold application approach to finding your work? It comes down to the numbers. Just 2% of cold applications make it through the interview invitation, but 74% of seekers start with this approach, which is terrible odds. Meanwhile, on the other side, we've got 66% of jobs come from what David Burkus calls your loose connections. And the pool of jobs that you won't find by looking on job boards might account for 70% of the opportunities out there, according to Career Horizons research. So the old way of find the job and apply has terrible odds, whereas this positioning and clarity and networking approach has much stronger odds. So with that scene set and that intro out of the way, we're going to have a game show question, because we've got several live exercises lined up for this, but we don't have the time to go through all of them. So just like a terrible 1980s game show, you get to decide which we do to make sure that we get the most out of this session. So tell me, where do you feel most stuck? In the comments with an A or a B. Do you want help with finding your niche and exploring all of the different things that you could be doing? Or do you want help with translating what you've got and putting that and framing that in a manner which the market is going to respond to? Which is a great way to do this, Andy, but translating skills. Now I've got to add all this up. A, B, 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 A, B. That's okay, because I think the Bs are going to get this, except for Deanna, both. Well, Diana, you're lucky, because any that we don't cover, I also have the resources to back us up. So it just means that we're not going to do it live as a group. Okay, I think we're going to go with B, I think. Even though this might be the hardest question that you've been asked. But listen, irrespective of where you are in the journey, the most important question that I see people get wrong all the time is, where do you even start? And now I need to bring the screen out of the way, and it's not moving. We start most controversially, not by looking for jobs, but before that. It starts with whether you are new to the field and wondering about your existing experience transfers, or if you're already in sustainability and you want to be making your role more impactful. You need to start with asking that question before looking for roles and looking for the change, around the how will you know when you found what you're looking for? So let's start with that. This is a 3-phase, but they are cumulative, and critically, they start with the criteria, or the clarity of criteria, and then building your filter so that you know how to recognize the work that you want to do when you find it. To make this even simpler, you could think of this as the 3 Fs: filter, funnel, focus. And we're going to start with filter. I ask my clients this in our first sessions every time. How will you know when you found what you're looking for? And you'd be amazed at how many people can't really answer that clearly. So most people start with something like, I'll be happy in the work, or I'll feel like I'm making an important impact. So I have this vague sense of just better than this, that they can only be sure of once they're in the role. But ultimately, you have to narrow the focus. You have to have a way of bringing your attention down to be able to go after one thing, because you need to feel able to put 5 hours into a single application. You need to be able to address the fear of missing out and niching down and know what it is that you want to do. Because if you're not doing that, somebody else is. The market is tough right now. So to get clear is to get ahead. It also means that you're going to have to decide. Now, I'm married into a Greek family, and my Greek wife takes huge amounts of pleasure giving me either the ancient Greek or ancient Latin derivations of English words. And to decide has the same root as insecticide, homicide, and pesticide. So when we're saying and talking about we have to decide, what we're actually talking about is killing off the alternatives, not picking one thing. It's taking the other things away so that we have the clarity to go after one thing. And in order to do that, we need this criteria to be able to say no to many, many things, because we have this, well, we could do so many things that could help in so many different ways. You won't be able to do that unless you can pick one to focus all of your time and energy and networking on. So we need some criteria. You can think of the criteria as a funnel, a V shape, 4 different tiers: fundamentals, your strengths, your values, and your sense of self. And we're going to talk about those very briefly. And then depending on the votes, we're going to look at the exercises that come with that. So fundamentals at the top. It is the easy questions to ask, which does not mean they're easy to answer. The fundamentals about your future work might be things like, is there travel involved? Or is it remote first? Or is there a lot of money? Or is there a little bit of money? Do you need to be constantly learning? Is it a solo contributor kind of environment? Do you want to be part of a big team? Like the shape of work, like the kind of questions that your parents probably asked you when you were describing the first job you got in your first career, if you're anything like me and my parents. However, I obviously digress. So we're going to cover very quickly an exercise which will help you with that. But like I say, you can think about these questions. It's quite easy. You're designing a future life. We can talk about strengths, and I don't mean the skills. I mean the things which make you innately you. Skills you can learn, you can retrain, you can add new things to, but your innate character strengths typically fixed in your late teens. And there's tons of exercises you can do for strengths assessments, like the Gallup 2.0. Kind of gets into a little bit of the Myers-Briggs kind of world. Love them or like them, or love them or loathe them, they do have a use. And having a good sense of what your strengths are is useful because you use them as criteria. Because you can use them to say things like, if I am deeply analytical, is this particular type of work going to play to my strengths? Because if it does, you have the unfair advantage of doing something that other people find hard that you find easy. Beneath strengths, we have values. Now, values is a horrible word which has been absolutely ruined in the late 90s to early noughties because every company decided they need a value statement and a mission statement, and it ruined it for everybody. It doesn't help that if you take a values assessment on a Monday morning in the rain and a Friday afternoon in the sun, you kind of get 2 different answers. But there is enough overlap in the middle. There is enough consistency or persistency of your values. So it's a little bit like fortune cookies in the way. The actual answer doesn't matter. What matters is how you feel and resonate with what comes back. And again, tons of ways of figuring out your values and card sorting exercises you can find online. But right at the bottom, perhaps the most important, and this is your sense of self and your sense of identity. I come from the Jungian school of psychology. We are many selves, all fighting for dominance. If you've seen the film Inside Out, you kind of know what I'm talking about here. And being able to identify those parts of yourself and understand which of them are going to help you and which of them are going to hinder is really useful. And it's useful for 2 reasons. If you decide that on the inside, Jen, you've got a creative Jen and a protective Jen and a nurturing Jen, or an analytical Jen, or maybe Alex, on the inside, you've got an imposter syndrome, or self-saboteur, or procrastinator, or fear of change, or all these different parts of yourself. If you can name them, you can have a dialogue with them. And you can ask things like, does protective Jen find this idea of work more or less appealing? And you can use that to start asking the future you version of, like, these are the kind of things that I want to spend my time being. And in the meantime, you get to recognize and befriend your imposter syndrome and self-saboteur that you're going to meet along the way as you go through this difficult change. Okay, we're going to move on because we voted this way, I think. So the exercise which you can do in your own time is knowing your fundamentals, which is fundamentally, if you landed your dream wallet in your inbox, what must it have? Sorry, what must it not have? And therefore, so it must have. And then everything else you'd want to design into your life. And again, I've got a script for that, which you can go through in the resource book. Same with an exercise that looks at your many selves. It's like a guided conversation, just going a little bit deeper. So you get a view at the top and a view at the bottom, and you build this criteria. So this is all well and good. As a quick recap, we've built this funnel. We built the filter, and now we need the funnel. This is where we add things into the top. So, brilliant. This is the fun and exciting bit where we do design thinking to say, there are no wrong answers. But we have to address a problem if we want to do this in a way which is going to help us overcome that fear of missing out. And we're going to do this not by researching on our own. We have to address our poor cognitive availability, which is kind of just a fancy way of saying there's so many different solutions out there, or jobs or roles that you could do that you're not aware of because you just don't have any visibility. It's Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns, that you have this constant sense of, oh, maybe there's something that I should be doing that I can't see. So trying to find that out on your own is really hard, because as humans, we are engineered to see what we know plus a little bit. So we're going to dispense with that, and we're going to take a pincer approach. We're going to do an outside in and an inside out approach. And we're going to look at the first of those first. So we're going to look at the inside out bit. So people do things not because they think they should. The rational part of our brain just isn't powerful enough to make us stick to the diet or go to the gym and keep exercising. We do things because of what the outcome means to us emotionally. And it's the same with meaningful work. Bluntly, you have to care enough for it to have meaning for you. And so the easiest way to tap into that, sadly, is via the negative pathway, which is basically what makes you angry. Now, this is the second exercise. It's okay, don't panic. We're going to come back to this because we voted to spend more time on translating my skills. But the what makes me angry approach is you can start with this really big picture, whether it's corporate greed or the injustice and the imbalance or the deforestation. And to start with this big, all-encompassing, painful part of you, which is one of the reasons why you're on this call. Something in you gives enough emotional content about a particular problem. And it's to take that 50,000 foot view to ask yourself, why? Who is impacted by this? Why is it that you are so angry about it? Who do you know or might know personally who is impacted by this? What does it make you feel when you see this potential suffering? So spend some time with what makes you angry. Spend some time with okay, now you're all fired up. What kind of solutions exist? And take the top 3 skills that you've got and then try and bring those 2 things together. Now, like I say, it's an exercise that you can do in your own time. It's going to bring you to something that sits a little bit like this intersection. So it's hard to do this. So it's a definite case of letting the creativity flow. We are looking for a hypothesis, not an answer, because ultimately you cannot know at this stage. There's 2 things that you could do to help you along the way with this. One of them is, as ever, ask ChatGPT. But secondly, you can stand on the shoulder of giants. And our friends over at Climate Drift have built a map with the 220 climate solutions that's sort of arranged in 6 categories, which obviously you can't see on the screen, but that's okay because it's in the resource pack, which I'll send it afterwards. But it looks at where the thing that makes you angry, the solution space, is in energy or in transport or in food waste or in what else was the 6 important categories: regenerative agriculture, finance, etc. And then it takes each of these and branches off into the areas in which we as a society are exploring solutions. So This is an opportunity to explore the what makes you angry, follow it through this map, and at the end of each of these, you get the set of keywords or very specific tasks which people are doing, and it gives you the search terms to start from. Okay. Meanwhile, the other side of the pincer movement isn't coming from in here. It's taking your criteria and handing it to the hive mind in an exercise called Me for Hire, in which you can take just some of the criteria, somebody with these kind of values and these kind of strengths, and very importantly, ignoring your past experience and your skills, and then asking everybody that you know, what would somebody with these kind of criteria enjoy and be good at? And you can send that out to 50 people, former colleagues, post it in Work on Climate. It's a great resource. And everybody loves giving answers because it's Solomon's paradox. Everyone loves giving advice to someone else's problem. So asking this kind of question and asking for 5 ideas or 3 ideas will bring you a whole bunch of new things. And that will do a long list of maybe 30 solutions or 30 suggestions. And that's useful because that will either validate what you're already thinking or bring you an idea or a concept you hadn't thought of before. And it might just make you think, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to spend some time to research into that a little bit more. Okay, so now we've got one side on the short list and the other side on the short list, and it's time to bring those together. So, like I said, picking an answer at this point is almost impossible because the risks are just too big. There are too many unknowns, and so we are likely to be making too many assumptions. So instead of saying, I'm going to be a supply chain analyst in regenerative agricultural systems, which is so many steps from where you are right now, with so many assumptions, we need to make it a lot smaller and de-risk making a step forward. Otherwise, we end up in this doom loop of so much analysis and an inability to step forward. So what we're looking for is a short list of a role type and a sector, ultimately a problem to solve. It does not have to be final. And I'm going to say that again. It does not have to be final, because in the next stage, we're going to find out the shortest possible route to understanding enough about that particular area to make some meaningful decisions. And to do that, we need to develop a method of focus. Okay. In this, we must de-risk the application of the single most important resource that you have, which is, of course, your time. So again, we're going to borrow some design thinking here for rapid prototyping. It's the answer when you don't know enough. So what I mean by that is, instead of trying to say, what 6-month course do I need to take in order to be able to become a sustainable analyst in regenerative agriculture? Your question is, what is the shortest route to finding out enough to start bringing some of the information back to my criteria to decide whether I'm going to pivot or persevere in the regenerative agriculture space? And it is always find the people first. So we're going to climb the commitment ladder. And the commitment ladder looks like this. It means you cannot figure this out by simply figuring it out. And procrastinating through planning and LinkedIn scrolling and job board hunting just won't help. If there is anybody who speaks Japanese on the call, I'm apologizing in advance. Because in order to solve this problem, we need to genchi genbutsu, which translates as go see for yourself. It comes from a Toyota manufacturing revolution in which the recognition and understanding of the importance of actually going and finding out through experience on the production line rather than sitting and theorizing it in the manager's office on the upstairs was the shortest route to solving the problem. So doing is key. And we can build these short loops, these tests. It can be very, very small, but it will increase with commitment as you go. So an example might be thinking about regenerative agriculture is find 5 people who are working in that space and having an informational interview with them and a conversation. And from that, you bring that information back, look at the criteria that you've got and say, well, based on what I know now, am I willing to pivot or persevere towards or away from this particular line of investigation? The beauty of this is it also means that you've just started your network because you've just built 5 people or connected with 5 people who are in this space. So if the answer is that you're going to persevere, that's great. The next thing you can do is you can write up what you've just learned from those 5 conversations and convert it into, I don't know, a LinkedIn post or an article or the beginning of an article. You don't have to be the expert, but you're sharing what you're learning. So you're also able to build this breadcrumb trail of proof along the ladder as you go. So it might start with 5 conversations. You decide that regenerative agriculture is something that's interesting and does meet enough of your criteria, not to be your future career, but to invest a day's online course in, cohort-based online course. Has to be cohort because on the back of that cohort, you've got the next set of your network built. And you can take what you've learned in that course, turn that into something that you can post on LinkedIn or share in Work and Climate. And again, you've got that little proof point that says that you are heading in the right direction and that people can find you and see what you are thinking and writing about. The question is always, are you willing to spend the next incremental part of your time following this path? So 5 conversations, an online course, a 2-day conference, and then a mini proof project. And the mini proof projects, I'm going to come on to when we get into the applying stage in a little bit more detail, but it's basically a thing that you can do that you can then use to show your future colleagues, collaborators, or co-founders that you get the problem. Not necessarily that you have the solution, but you get the problem. Okay. Each step only needs to answer that one question. Are you prepared to pivot or persevere? This rapid prototyping, this loop of build a test and then learn from it, the faster you can get around that loop, the quicker you progress up the ladder and the closer you become to narrowing down your niche and finding the thing that you want to be able to work on. Okay. The assumption now is that we've got a filter, a way of finding out or figuring out whether a particular path is the right one for you. We've put some ideas in the top. We've crowdsourced them from colleagues and strangers and a whole variety of people, shortlisted that. We've thought about the emotional connection to a particular problem, and we've used the climate solutions map to start building a sense of whether it's something that you want to do or not. And then we've used this up the commitment ladder to test and learn as you go. The next part is the big question, which is the how to get the job you want. And in this session, we're going to have the live exercises that we voted for at the start. But before we do that, there is a 2-minute break. Mainly because I'm going to have a glass of water and I've got a trendy uppy downy desk and I'm going to sit down for the next bit. But also because that was half an hour, 40 minutes of one-way communication. So stay fresh, get up, shake it off. I'm not sure if everyone's on video. I'm on video. I don't mind shaking. You can do shaky face. You can do whatever you like. And whilst we do that, I'm also going to bring my chair in, have a sip of water, bring the desk down. There we go. All right. And just take a moment. Yeah. I'm also taking this a moment to have a look through some of the answers about what makes me angry. I know. Kevin, the personas that help and Kevin Shock, the personas that help and hinder is going to be really interesting for you, I think, based on your comment. Mhm. Okay. Are we ready? I'm going to ask Martin Anderson, give us an emotion. Will, Spillane, Diana, Jen H. Is everyone ready? Get back in? Yeah. Okay. All right. Kayla gives 2 thumbs fresh. Excellent. All right. That's good enough for me, Kayla. Fantastic. Okay. So, how to get the job that you want. Getting the job is fundamentally about signaling your value to the right people at the right time. And to do that successfully, you need to work on 3 things: your credibility, your visibility, and your network. And as you know already, none of those things involve your CV. It is a constant bugbear of mine, as is apparent. So we're going to take each of these in turn. I'm going to start with your credibility. And the reason I'm going to talk about credibility is because this is one of the biggest blockers I see in career transitions. So whether you're shifting into sustainability for the first time, or whether you're trying to move into a more strategic or impactful role and you're already in sustainability, you often have this internal voice which is saying, am I actually good enough for this? And at the same time, there is the external question coming from the hiring managers, the collaborators, and funders, and they're all asking, should we trust this person? And that's this credibility gap. It doesn't mean that you lack the skills. It usually just means that your story isn't landing well enough. And the biggest mistake I see over and over again is failing to see the problem that needs to be solved in a manner or in the framing of the people who have the problem. So with that in mind, the best piece of advice is simply don't make them think. Don't give your potential colleagues or collaborators or co-founders a puzzle. Show them that you get their problem. A climate tech founder who's just made their Series A's raise is laying awake at night worrying about telling a compelling story of operational efficiency or cost or sales improvements to their investors, not how to hire a new skill set. So you need to be able to talk about the problems that they have, not about the skills that you have. So how do we do that? We have to give them a low cognitive effort to see your value. And what I mean by that really is just to say, just make it obvious. And we can do that in 3 ways. There is proof, something that shows you can actually do the work. It doesn't have to be huge, it just has to be real. There is positioning. There is how you talk about your past so that it makes sense in the context of the problem. And finally, there is clarity. Do people walk away from your profile or your intro or your post knowing what you're about and critically able to explain that to somebody else? Because once you have those 3 things working together, your credibility stops becoming the question and it starts becoming the answer. So, how do we do this? I'm glad you asked, Andy. Great. Thank you, rhetorical voice. Okay, so you don't need permission to prove your value, and you don't always need qualifications either. So I'm going to talk about proof projects, telling your story, and the shaping what you have. So, proof projects. An example of this, you think about running a 2-week solo project tackling a real sustainability problem. You could volunteer on a local or virtual initiative and share what you've learned. You could write up a case study of a previous piece of work that you've done, but frame it through a climate lens. You could share a teardown or model or resource on LinkedIn with a here's what I'd do differently kind of approach. There were tons of ways of doing this that you do not need permission, and there are no barriers to doing. So 2 real life examples, which I've really admired. I worked with a UX designer who took an existing solar installations company's website, screen grabbed their design, ran that through a conversion rate optimization process, and then rebuilt it in blocks, showing how she would improve it. She went on to do this for a number of other organizations and then created a portfolio of demonstrable proof that she could solve the problem of low conversions. Now, her approach to working in sustainability wasn't, I need to be doing the work of the solar companies, but she wanted to use her skills to push forward the renewable sector. And so she realized that one of the biggest problems was conversions in selling home solar installations. And so she did this off her own bat and then improved the conversion rates through her portfolio work. She did it all online. She allowed people to follow the story, a little bit like the second great example, which is Anna Corlath over at The Good Illustrator. And Anna, every week, puts together a branding toolkit for a sustainability topic and then shares the thinking and the process via LinkedIn. Topics have covered things like soil and seaweed, and it's kind of fun, but it also is a great vehicle to show, not tell, what she does, so people get it. So, question to you is, what could you build or show that is aligned or adjacent to the problem that you want to solve? And again, in the resource pack, there's some prompts to help you think through this. The next part of this is telling your story. And this is important because if you don't shape your story, then somebody else will, or worse, they'll just forget it. So you need to make it ridiculously easy to understand what you do now and what you're looking for. So you could update your LinkedIn headline to something like, I help X do Y in Z. A simple one-liner that makes sense outside of your previous industry, but makes sense in the industry that you want to go towards. This is also about owning the future version of yourself too, which helps with the imposter syndrome. So the more times that you're able to convincingly say, I'm a sustainability consultant working in the built environment, helping small to medium-sized organizations reduce their carbon footprint in construction. Awkward because I just made that up. The more you practice that out loud, the more you convince yourself, the more comfortable and confident you become in actually pitching and presenting yourself in that manner. So practice it. Practice this new story, test it in conversations, see what reaction you get, refine what lands. It's the beginning of that classic elevator pitch. Okay, and then the shape what you have. We often undersell ourselves because the translation between our past experience and our next step suffers from a framing and language problem. So this is live exercise time. Have you got a pen and paper ready? Wave it in the air if you have, because we said, thank you, Jen. We said yes to translating my skills. Okay. All right. So to overcome this framing question, we have to translate your experience into outcomes that they care about. Not the ones that you're proudest of, not the ones that showcase your technical depth, the ones that match their pain. So here's how. We're going to take the first work experience that comes to mind and we're going to kind of deconstruct it and then put it back together from the perspective of the problem that it solved. There is a nuance in this work and it is the following. At the moment, if you're unsure of the problem that you're going to solve or the area or the sector that you want to work into, this is really hard. So it's okay to use something that you've previously done in the industry or sector that you're in at the moment, and just try and frame it from the organization that you're working for's perspective. That will make more sense in a moment. So pick any recent or old work experience. What is important is learning how to do this, not really picking the right experience. That will come later. So pick an example from your CV or LinkedIn profile or off the top of your head, and let's reframe it. So we're going to start with the problem. The problem in the organizational sense. I want you to write down, forget all the things that you've done or the project, whatever it is, write down the problem that it was solving. Something like the company was losing customers due to terrible onboarding. As you can probably tell, I've been thinking a lot about UX recently. This happens to be a conversation I had with a client quite recently. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I can see the messages if you get stuck or want to ask questions. Okay. And I'm going to set a timer, which I think only I can see. And I'm not going to watch over your shoulder. In fact, I'm going to, am I going to risk going off camera? No, I'm not. All right. So 2 minutes. Frame the experience that you have in your mind from the company's challenge perspective. Okay, you have 30 seconds left. All right. Zach. Yes, I will. Oh, can I? Only by typing it out. I will do that for the next one. All right. So now we need to describe your intervention and make it strategic, not tasky. So an example might be that I mapped the user journey, led a design sprint, and rebuilt the first touch experience. Now, again, this is 2 minutes. This is called forced brevity. You kind of just have to go with the first thing that comes rather than getting into reshaping it, refining it, reshaping, refining it. We've got 2 minutes on the timer. Go. Alex P, this is a thing that you have done. So that would be a past problem that you have solved. Because what we're looking to do here is to be able to tell the story in a compelling manner of the work that you've done. Okay, 30 seconds left. And Kevin Shock, thank you for sharing. This has got the great beginning of a fantastic story. I'm already want to know how you solved this. Okay. Turn the timer off. Next is the result, but we're going to go one step further than this. Because otherwise it's the fairly classic kind of star format for interview, but we need to get better. So what was the result of the problem being solved? Beyond just a bottom line impact, why was it important at the time in the context of the organization's journey or their strategic goals? And this is the framing element. So rather than just pointing out that the project was completed on time and to budget, who cared? What was the actual impact of that happening? And one of the ways that is sometimes helpful to think about this is to think about if you hadn't done this, this project this experience that you're describing, if that hadn't happened or hadn't gone well, what would the consequence of that have been? Kevin, I like it. It's got to be shorter. Yeah. Okay. So just looking at that, that sounds like basically you solve that with a technical fix on via the electrical noise problem. And that they have 100 sites in place. Now, my question is, why was it important that they got 100? Oh, shh, shh, cancel that. Why was it important that they got these 100 sites? What was the funding implication of those 100 sites? Why was it essential right then for that to have happened? Like the bigger strategic goals, because it sounds like, or you can frame this as your work leading this group to be instrumental to that happening. Okay, there's two other steps, and this is what really puts the icing on the cake. I mentioned about the what would happen if you hadn't succeeded. The adjacent question to that is, who would have been fired if this had gone wrong? Or what we're trying to get to is the person. We're trying to get to like the archetype of the person who kind of gives a shit about whether this is going to work or not. That might be the head of department. That might be a team lead. That might be founder. If you are the founder, that might be one of your investors. It might be a particular part of the investment wing. It might have been a financial implication. It might have been an operations lead implication. But who? Who was lying awake at night, panicking that what you were doing might not happen? Who got the sweaty palms of like, damn, I hope Kevin manages to sort this out because otherwise we're in a real mess. Because that is the person that you are solving the problem for. And when you take this experience, or when you start looking for finding the opportunity to go and solve novel problems elsewhere, you need to be able to find the person who is going to be worrying about this kind of thing. So when you think about the person, the next step is to add one thing, one extra piece, which just tips it from a really good story in a succinct manner that shows and frames how you solve problems for a particular type, and then applies it to a novel situation or sector. It's the final touch. And you can use the what I learned from this. You can use the phrase, I think the thing that stood out most from this experience was the importance of ... And the trick there is, of course, to make that ... be the thing which they are hiring for. So you're reinforcing the fact that your ability to play across different silos was the thing that made this work. But I also said right at the start, your opinion of what that is genuinely doesn't matter. Because no one cares about your opinion about this. What we need to do is to speak to the person who is worrying about this not happening. It is the research that goes into that that is required to figure out. So I'm just going to give, excuse me, I'm going to give 60 seconds here just as a list of ideas. Because until you do the research, you can't decide which one is most important, but the kind of things that you learned from this experience. Okay, Kevin, since you're in the comments, what stood out for me most was how grateful the career installation team was. Well, what is it that you learned? Well, why is their gratitude important? There's another level to go to beyond that you've got in the list so far. Okay, so what I was saying around the challenge here is you need to frame this from the perspective of the person who's holding the budget, holding your potential wall above your head. And the way to do that, bearing in mind that from a 10 minutes and a standing start, this is only a beginning, you need to do the research. And the research into this is the archetype or the individual whose problem you're solving, whether that's the head of marketing, whether that's the founder who's just landed a big funding round, whether that's the head of operations who is hiring because they're slipping behind their client delivery, whether that's the sales team lead who is struggling to meet their numbers this year, and the pressure from their PE backing is mounting. Like, just find that person and just look at beyond, find out what is keeping them awake. Because when you're framing the I've done this thing in the past, it's not exactly a bullseye for what they're looking for, but you can say the thing that I learned from this was understanding the internal pressures of having private equity forcing occasionally the wrong decision. And so I was able to take a step back and bring a little bit of clarity and calm in order to realign our sales strategy with the reality on the ground. Now, if I'm head of sales with that pressure, that would be music to my ears. Of course, I want someone to do that. The fact that they've not done it in my sector, I don't care. They understand my problem. You are the painkiller. Okay. So again, I've included a whole guide of this in the resource pack, everything from smart ways to use ChatGPT to find synonyms for the skills that you've got. Because often, marketing isn't marketing, it's communications, sales isn't sales, it's partnership development. There's a whole lexicon that you have to learn. But this is all well and good, but that's only true if you're actually found and seen. So let's talk about visibility, because this is where most mid-career professionals, especially those coming from traditional corporate backgrounds, quietly sabotage themselves. Because you're probably used to being brilliant behind the scenes, you solve problems, you deliver, but perhaps you're not quite as used to telling people about it. And in climate and sustainability, a lot of the opportunities are informal. You get referred, you get recommended, you get invited in. But here's the thing, you can't be referred if people can't remember what you do. And if you're still showing up online as your old job or not at all, you're making it really hard for people to help you. So visibility isn't about being loud and personally branding yourself in a cringy way. It's simply about signaling clearly and consistently who you are becoming. The people who build traction here are the ones who make it easy to say, you should speak to Norman because he's been writing about this recently, and I think he gets it. That. But look, this isn't easy, and I know this, and you're about to prove it. Because in the chat, give me one word impression of how you feel about posting online on something like LinkedIn. Go. One word. Cringy, awkward, yuck, cringy, cringe, unclear, nervous, targeted, oof. Nice, Lily, just oof. Performative, shy, cringy. You know what I'm not seeing? Anybody saying, oh, I fucking love this. Yeah, I'm well into it. Yep, brilliant. I'm well keen. And the reason for that is only a psychopath would think this is a brilliant idea. No one likes to do this. It's true. You think about me and what I have to do every day. Getting started was possibly one of the hardest things that I've done. But I found the community and I found the people who are online who genuinely care and are trying to do the right thing. And although it was cringy to start off with, there's a load of good writing breeds good thinking. And now I'm not quite in the psychopath region of I enjoy it all the time, but I genuinely look forward to engaging with people online. which I never thought I'd ever be able to say. All right. Biggest problem, and 90% of my clients hate this as well, we suffer from the spotlight effect and we suffer from imposter syndrome. We think everyone is watching us and we think we have nothing to say. So here is how to overcome those two things, which is the performative element of it, Ryan, this spotlight. So firstly, we think about where you spend your time and effort building your visibility. If you're new to this, don't let the overwhelm defeat you. Like you've got to be everywhere and do all these things all the time. Simply be incremental. And you can start with your LinkedIn profile. It is your professional shop window. It is where anyone, well, most people will go to find out enough about you before they speak to you, or Googles you, or refers you, or will reach out and connect. They almost always check it first. It is where recruiters spend most of their time. And having employed hundreds of people over the last 25 years, it is also the place that I go, and all of my colleagues have always gone. You check out a CV and go, yeah, but what are they actually talking about? So I've got again, do you want to spend time going through that? No, because you can use Google to find a 9-step plan in order to get your LinkedIn profile on track. There is so much advice online. I'm not going to waste time going through it here. However, I do have my own 9-step guide, which is available in the resource pack, and I will happily send it to your way. I think the difference there is I've tried to give time estimates for each section. You're going to rewrite your about page. That's a biggie, might take you an hour. You're going to do little tweaks, treat it incremental. You can plot and plan out the course of the work to get it done. Okay, so that's your profile. Second, your communities. These are the rooms that you show up in, even if just to listen. If you're not part of any groups or forums where the work you want to be doing is being talked about, then start there. Obviously, great shout out for the work on climate. That get a start point there. But in there are niche boards for different sectors. These are high signal communities. So there's a great resource called So You Want to Work on Climate, a resource and index for hundreds of different micro boards about specific problems. Go and join. You can start by just lurking. And thirdly, it is your conversations. It is the most underrated move in visibility. Commenting on someone else's post or thoughts with insight or encouragement or just a good question is a great way to get involved in the conversation. Don't overthink it, just start. One thoughtful comment is often worth more than a whole polished, perfectly written out post. I know a lot of people find this hard. So think of it as my favorite model, climbing a ladder. Because you can climb this listen, comment, curate, create ladder. Without an expert point of view and with the tyranny of imposter syndrome breathing down your neck, you can feel terrified of engaging. But again, use a ladder to incrementally engage. Listen and learn, obvious first step, but it builds your feeds intentionally. Rather than coming onto LinkedIn as an example and having so much stuff to go through, focus on the handful of thought leaders that you want to actually follow and start curating your own feed. Treat it like you own your own inputs. You are the editor of your own magazine. Okay, so from the listening, you can then build to commenting. And then this is if you've got no audience, it's no problem. You can borrow the audience of the thought leaders in this space, find them, follow them, and comment. Your future colleagues and collaborators and potentially co-founders will be in these comments and conversations too. Now, back to that point at the top. If you don't have anything interesting to say, what are you going to say? Well, most people respond very well to curiosity about their point. So it is as useful to ask smart questions than it is to bring answers, because you're not going to be the expert in the room. But you can help other people feel that they are the expert by asking smart answers. And I don't just mean you go online and comment and everyone's like, that's great, can you tell me more? Read it, think about it, start to bring in some of the experience and knowledge that you're building in the sector to ask a meaningful question. Then you can start to leverage your value as an information node in that you can compile and summarize and curate what you're learning and then, and then either repost or bring a few posts together and build that into your own post and begin that step of creating. To be clear, I don't just mean regurgitate. I mean add value by adding short form summary. You'll be moving up the ladder. One of my favorite things to do is to consider providing a service to those people who were like you 10 hours of reading and 3 conversations ago and give them a helping hand. Wouldn't it have been awesome, Jen, if you'd found someone who was always about 3 weeks ahead of you and was phrasing and describing the problem area that you were researching in a way that was just a little bit ahead, but in a way that you got? That would be awesome. There are so many people who want that. And if you're able to do that, then you are going to have the opportunity to be connected and networked, and the opportunities will come to you. Which is why, after we've built this process, this listen, comment, curate, create, the next question is, who is actually seeing you? Which is where we get to network. Now, at this point, I'm going to check time. We have 20 minutes left. We're going to get time for some conversations at the end. I think that's going to be okay. All right. So visibility without connection can still leave you stuck. So the real momentum comes when people don't just see your work, they start talking about it as well. They start sharing your stuff and they start inviting you in. Those conversations build into a dialogue. And that's where your network starts doing the heavy lifting. The focus is the connections in the network, not more time on job boards. But you already know that, right? Because I've been persistently banging on about it for the last hour and 11 minutes. Good. Okay. So the question is, how do we use our time most effectively? There has to be this return on network I know I stumbled on this, return on network investment, or RONI. That's kind of riffing off return on marketing investment. Perhaps I shouldn't have done that. Okay. We need to use your time wisely, ultimately. Networking isn't the small talk at conferences and swapping business cards and hoping something good will come out of it. Networking has to have this return of time spent concept applied. So who should you talk to? Well, as a former management consultant, I always like models and circles and pyramids. And this slide has got concentric rings. It's a classic. We're starting in the center. Who should you talk to? Start from the center and work outwards. This is the high return relationships. People inside your target organizations, the mid-level staff, cross-functional collaborators, not just HR or the person who's got the job offer. Again, in the resource pack, there's a whole bunch of ways of finding the people who are adjacent to a particular role or in a company that you want to work for. These connections can give you inside information or referrals or early intelligence on upcoming roles. And I don't mean by asking for it, I mean by following what they are describing and talking about online. These are your warmest paths into real opportunities. These are the people that you can be asking insightful questions of. Okay, so you don't have to pitch. You just have to show curiosity and initiative. In the middle ring are the momentum builders. These are the subject matter experts, the thought leaders, the people who probably aren't going to actually give you a job, but they're the people talking about the problems that you care about and you want to solve. Here is the open forum to engage, to learn and to contribute to the conversation because, like I said before, your future colleagues and collaborators or possibly co-founders, they are looking at this conversation. And if you're in that conversation, you are turning up again and again and consistently. The outer ring is the energy and insight boosters, the people potentially who are already in your network or former colleagues or even uni mates or dormant contacts. Reconnecting and with light updates may be a useful way of finding people who've moved into an area that you're interested in. Also here, it's really helpful to look for career switchers who are a few steps ahead of you. They can remember the messy middle, they can save you time, boost your confidence, and potentially introduce you to other people. And in the resource pack, there's a couple of descriptions where you can set LinkedIn filters to say, well, who is working in my chosen space, who 5 years ago was not working in my chosen space, and then sort by that group of people and say, hey, you made it into my chosen work of space. How did you do that? You can look for people who are going to be sympathetic. Another obvious and fantastic resource here is Open Door Climate. Open Door Climate, set up by Daniel Hill, is about 5,000 sustainability professionals who expressly realize the importance of helping other people do what they are currently doing in order to solve our planetary crisis. And they have expressly, implicitly holding the door open, clever name, Open Door Climate, to come and have a conversation with them. Ask them about these things. Okay, so they are the people. And now we just want to reframe the networking because, as we've already discussed, it's a word that brings up awful images of that transactional nature of conversation, that sales mode kind of energy. But in a climate career, where jobs are often created, not posted, your ability to connect matters more than your CV. So I want to offer a different way of thinking about it. It is curiosity, connection, and consistency. You don't need to be the expert. It's asking smart questions, as we've already covered. People remember genuine curiosity. It builds trust, shows a bit of vulnerability, and it opens doors without pressure. The second part of this is connection. You can think of yourself as the connector, not just as the seeker. The more time you spend doing this, figuring out the players and the thought leaders in a particular space, the more value you have to offer, probably more than you currently think already, even if you're early in your transition. Maybe it's a podcast or a link or simply saying, you should speak to so and so because you're both in the same field. Or I saw somebody else talking about this recently. Here is a link to their site. You are not the expert, but you are connecting and bringing value to the network in that manner. And the third one, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is consistency. It is a long game, and that means treating it like a project and not like a panic button. Track who you've spoken to, note what you've learned. If you're not using a CRM or even a simple spreadsheet, then you'll find one in the resource pack, along with a comprehensive guide for templating outreach emails that work, finding the right people to connect with, etc. And I've included a cheeky trick that translates your list of the people you want to stay in touch with into a one-click button that brings all of their content into one place on LinkedIn to help overcome the overwhelm of every time I go into LinkedIn, I sink an hour and nothing happens. Okay. So that about wraps this up. So let's recap why this approach works. It works because following these steps gives you a clear plan so that you maintain momentum. It builds your network, which is essential because 66% of jobs come from your soft network. And it enables you to show, not tell, via the proof trail that you're leaving. And critically, it helps you craft your narrative and refine your positioning in the market so that you are talking uniquely about the problems that you solve. None of this is easy, but the most important place to start is with this work. Revising your resume again or worrying about your cover letter again are all distractions compared to the fundamental importance of being able to confidently articulate the problem you are trying to solve, who you solve it for, and how you solve it. Okay, I said at the start that what matters now isn't what you've listened to, because my gosh, that's a lot of one-way information. And if you're still listening, congratulations, you have an incredible attention span. It's what matters next. It's what you do next is what matters. So in this much described resource pack, I've put together all of the resources which are currently on screen. The Work on Climate crew will be sharing a recording of this session, along with links to all of the following, everything's on there. One minor note is that the guides, they come out as a sequence of emails, so you don't just get all of it in an overwhelming, now do all of this stuff, a couple of days apart, have a look at your profile, have a look at this, etc. And if you're serious about making this transition or curious about what it would be like to do that in a concerted, structured, and supported manner, then I've pulled much of this very intense session from the masterclass course, which is coming up in a few weeks. It's a 6-week sprint designed to help professionals like you make the move into meaningful work. Now, this is about to be a shameless plug, which I don't feel comfortable, but it's because I want to help you make a difference. I'm in this ultimately because I want to be able to answer my children's questions about what I was doing when all of this was going on and they were growing up. So if you're curious about what a cohort of people can do when they're armed with this kind of approach and the support to do it together, check out the program. Details are on screen. Bookmark it for review. If now is not the right time, that's totally fine. basically, I'm here to help. And if I can in any way, let me know. We've got, oh my gosh, we've got 11 minutes. And I said it'd be 10 minutes for questions. Okay, that's it. It's possibly the greatest thing I've done this week. Finished. Kind of like I need to fill 30 seconds of before the time clicks, but I'm not going to do that. Okay, so Kayla has, let's have a look. There were loads of stuff in the chat. Okay. Questions.
I wrote a couple down,
Somebody,
actually.
somebody asked me, I saw one that skimmed through. Is LinkedIn important? I think I've kind of answered that to a degree. There's two ways of thinking about LinkedIn. You can think of it as it's sort of table stakes. It's where everyone will go to check you out first. And so at the absolute minimum, you need your profile to be that open shop window so that within the first no more than 9 seconds, which is about the attention you want to get from a recruiter, people can immediately see the problem that you solve, like that you are all about, I do this thing. That's kind of what they need. So as an absolute bare minimum, your profile needs to really nail that point. The other use for LinkedIn is an incredibly helpful learning resource. And I think a lot of people miss this. It's an incredibly helpful learning resource because the thought leaders in your problem space are or require their reputation to be maintained. And so they are typically putting 80 to 90% of everything that they can do and think about a particular problem out online for free. So if you find the 10 people who are leading your space who are on LinkedIn, your ability to have a incredibly curated knowledge building course delivered to your hand every morning is incredible. And so I've done this recently by following the likes of David Carlin, who's really focused on regulations, EU regulation changes. It's an incredibly dry topic, but every day he is reporting on the live changes and the implications of it. And he's, I think he's actually a former journalist as well, but his point of view is really, really useful. And so I'm keeping up to date with what's happening there because I'm using LinkedIn like a newsfeed as well. And I think a lot of people miss that. And then I guess the last part of it is the community is there. Not everybody, but there are enough people in our respective problem spaces who are on LinkedIn who are building these relationships and this networking. Now, I'm not saying do it exclusively. I recently interviewed a past client who is now a community manager for an in-person sustainability community. And I think we wrote the interview and called it something like from cringe to confident, I think was the sort of the story arc that she'd gone on. And one of the things that she was saying is that it's really helpful. It goes hand in hand. She does 2 or 3 in-person events every week because that's now her job. But it always goes hand in hand with like, oh, let's connect on LinkedIn to follow up the conversation. Okay. I can't remember exactly who that was asking right at the top, but I may have answered that. What weight do you put on master's degrees? Haha, Sam. Okay. Oh, I'm not sure if you're deliberately poking me here. Okay, Sam, this is true of all certifications and qualifications. Your view and my view of this question, as I've said before, really doesn't matter. What matters is the market view. And until you're able to, until you either denied something because you haven't got a degree, it's a pretty big risk to put down the money in 12 months to go and get one. So unless you're constantly sort of like, we'd love to give you the opportunity to do this work, but you haven't got a master's in this degree. And I don't mean because it's not on the shopping list of a job description, because we've all written well, I'm not sure we've all, if you've ever written job descriptions, you'll know they are a terrible, terrible format for describing the problem you're trying to solve. Because you end up just with a shopping list. You might as well finish it with something like, and would be great if you can fly and translate into 15 different languages. And it might be that more than one person has written it. It might even be that the person who has the problem hasn't got to write it because HR have said, oh, well, we need a project manager. All right, project manager description. It needs to be something in sustainability. Okay, well, let's add somebody with a degree in that space. So unless you're speaking to the people who have the problem, Sam, and they are telling you to your face, we'd love to give you this opportunity, but you haven't got a degree, then I think it's pretty punchy to put down a, bucket of money and 12 months of effort. I have one caveat to that, is that training less than certification, but training is really helpful at two ends of the spectrum. Right at the start, when you don't know very much about it, go and do something like the Terra do or Work and Climate. I've got a couple of things coming out as well, where it's you just want a quick dip in across the whole landscape. What could it look like? So a few years ago, I did Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership certification, and it was 8 modules across 8 problems, just to get a sense, to refresh, to remind myself of all the different issues that we were facing. And from that perspective, it was really useful. Then at the other end of the spectrum, if there is something really specific and technical that you have to have a qualification in to even actually do, then obviously you need that certification. Something very technical, possibly that requires like a regulatory step. Okay, we've got 4 minutes. Any questions? I've never talked to anyone. No. Kayla, is there anything that you can see? I'm scrolling upwards now.
Someone asked how they'll get the resource package.
Haha. Well, that is a great question. So we're going to send a follow-up email to this. And in that email is a link to a Notion page, which has got all the links to all the things that I've described. And if it's not there, because I've forgotten to put a link, then it's just proof that I am both fallible and also testing you. So if there's something that I've said is in this and it's not a link in that thing, then let me know and I'll add the link in. But we'll also, I think, Kayla, you guys are going to handle the sending out of a recording of this, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, with that send out will be a link to this Notion page with the stuff in.
Someone asked, is leaning into title and name dropping unavoidable to build credibility?
Well, do you know, King Charles came around the other day and he asked me this question as well. I was quite surprised. I'd have thought he'd got more things to do, but he sought out my opinion, and hanging out with the king is something that I do quite frequently. Do you mean like that? So credibility, that's a very good question with not an easy answer. So credibility really comes from being able to describe the problem to the person you're speaking to, because it doesn't necessarily have to be that you've got the solution. And I know it might sound like I'm repeating myself, but you are credible when you can show that you understand the difficulty or the challenge. So when you then want to say, and I'm credible because in my past I have, then again, that framing exercise we did when we were talking about what was the big, like the organizational scale problem that you contributed to, not the I'm credible because I helped a sales team sell more. Like, why was that important to the organization a bit further up or a bit further along in the maturity curve? That's the credibility. And you normally get that by being able to have that conversation and describe it, rather than just saying, I was the EVP of a 300-person team. Because ultimately, anybody that is going to have a question about your credibility is going to check you out on LinkedIn, and in your LinkedIn is going to be your list of experiences in which you say, I was EVP of this mega core. So it'll be there too. Okay, time for one more. In the meantime, I'm going to bring us to this, which is things only get better if you tell us what we can do better. I'm a massive believer in feedback. I tend to, now that I'm in the sort of the sustainability sector, is even more true. I spent 15 years telling people feedback is important and let me give you this feedback, but it's kind of a little bit of bit forced. But in our world, in our space, we really need to work feedback because we are all in this together. We only win when we all win. So it is important that you tell me and the Work on Climate team how we can serve you better, because you are the reason that we are doing this. We have to solve this problem collectively, and we are all trying to be the best that we can at this, and your feedback will help us do that. So that next time we have this conversation, I'll be a better me, giving you a better service, and you can think of it as legacy. Those who come after you will benefit from your feedback as well. You're passing on the experience and with very little effort, improving this for those who come after you too. And that, by my clock, is exactly past. Kayla, is there anything else that we need to do? Actually, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring up the full screen with everyone's faces. Sometimes it feels like I'm talking to myself in this little room. Are you there?
I think that's all. Thank you everyone for joining, and we will be reaching out, like Andy said, with the resource package. Please make sure to fill out the feedback survey. And yeah, thank you again for joining. And thank you, Andy.